Wonderful.
Hi, Georgette. I'm so glad that you said yes to do this together. And I'm honored to have you as a guest because I have been a big fan of your blog and you've been such an amazing friend, supporting every single project I have done in Florence.
Well, it's pretty easy to when you do such incredible work yourself. So consider the pleasure all mine. And I'm really
Thank
happy
you.
to do this. Honestly, what would I rather do on a Sunday evening than talk about, the city we both love so much and also just be with such great company. So
Yes,
thank you.
yes. All right. So I have prepared several questions. And I think the first thing I would love to ask you, and I'm sure everyone in the room wants to know, is how did you first move to Florence and what made you stay? Did you have that one moment when you knew, okay, this is it, this is the place for me? Or did that come slowly over time?
Well, it's, do you want the short version or the long version? But I think like many people, I of course knew about Florence growing up and things like that, whether it be through the art or the artistic heritage that exists there, but it never was a destination I ever thought I was going to live. My
Wow.
plan was to go to London because at the time, so I'm originally from San Antonio, Texas, born and raised. And then I moved to Los Angeles for university. And from then on, I was studying political science. So this is way before I was very interested in writing. I mean, writing was a hobby, but it wasn't really anything I was pursuing at the time professionally. Uh, but I had this opportunity to study abroad, junior year, like so many people do. And, I really wanted to go to London because for me, I saw London as, well, one, easy because English,
Yes.
but also just such a political hub, a cultural hub. It was close to, every the country in Europe. And what happened is that program just didn't work out. So they gave me a second option of going to Florence. And at the time I was pretty unsure because I think like a lot of Americans, especially when you're around that age, you're kind of thinking of like, first of all, how am I going to pay off college? Like I need to hustle. I need to do like 3 internships. I was working 2 jobs while in college. So I wasn't sure I would have the luxury, let's say, to study abroad and not have to worry about the funds and all that kind of thing. So luckily, though, I talked to my dad, and my dad has always been such like a just a very open-minded, generous person. I kind of like follow your dreams. He's very whimsical. My
Wow.
father, up until the pandemic started, he was an Uber driver. He's retired now. He worked for 30 years in immigration, and I would literally get random messages from people who who had him in the Uber, and they'd be like, "Your dad told us that we should read your blog."
Oh my God, that sounds like my dad. Sounds like my dad
Yeah.
who is visiting me here for 2 days before he heads back to Arizona. But yes, aren't we lucky to have great dads?
Yeah, I mean, first it was kind of embarrassing because he was used to be like, "Oh, my daughter, lives in Italy, so just email her a bunch of questions all the time." So it's, I mean, it's funny. I really appreciate it. But he's the one who basically said, "Georgette, you have this opportunity to go to Florence. Are you crazy? Like, what are you going to say no to that?" And it was true. I think I was just intimidated at the time because I felt like, okay, all these people that I'm going to be studying abroad with are, maybe they have some connection with Italy. Maybe they have an Italian American background. They studied Italian, and I didn't even know how to say cappuccino correctly. Like my knowledge of Italy was nil to zero. So before going, I think unlike a lot of people, I just didn't have this expectation of la dolce vita and
Yes, it
what
wasn't really
Italy
your
was going to
dream.
do.
It wasn't your
Yeah,
dream, really.
it was not
Yes.
my dream, which I think is confusing. Of course, Girl in Florence and everything that I do and my work in general is so tied to that. But I kind of credit the fact that I was able to live, and enjoy Florence for as long as I have, is being that I didn't have a lot of expectations. I didn't go in there with this presumed idea of what Florence was going to do for me.
Wow.
What I was thinking, okay, I'm going to see how it is. And of course, it's going to be nice, but I'm going to go back to Los Angeles eventually and live and work and not even think about anything else. But I really loved Florence. I felt like how incredible that you're in a place that's so small but that has so much history.
Yes.
The fact that I could walk everywhere. I mean, come on, I grew up in Texas. Like It's one air-conditioned bubble to another,
Yes.
you know, and in Los Angeles, kind of the same. So I was just so entranced by this kind of lifestyle that I didn't even know existed, essentially. And it was all stuff that I really enjoyed. You know, I was studying Italian, and of course I met Italians, and it became the place that was going to be my future home for 13 years. So it worked out. After studying abroad, I went back to Los Angeles to finish my degree for about a year. And then I worked for a PR firm over there just to see if I really wanted to live in Italy, or if it was just kind of like, oh, this whimsical study abroad experience. And then I came back in 2007. So that's when I came back full time. And that was kind of an interesting experience because I was no longer a student and I didn't have any friends. So it was literally like being launched into this, oh yeah, I know it, because I was in Florence for a year. But it was a whole new ball game. You know, I was living with an Italian family. Everybody was screaming in my face because they thought I couldn't understand. So they just spoke louder. So it was a culture shock. It was a culture shock again, because I had this student image of what Florence was like, but it was a completely different animal being a young working adult. So that's what brought me there. Okay. Why I stayed is the history of other events, but
okay. And how did the idea of the blog come on? And when did that occur to you? Because, you know, when I met you the first time, I think it was probably 2012. Mm-hmm. So I met you much later, you know, even though we were both in Florence. I got to Florence in 2006. And I remember talking about your blog and thinking, wow, this girl is so cool. And, you know, I couldn't wait to open your blog and see how it is and what you write about. So how did that all come?
Well, you know, it was a slow process. I think like a lot of people who have started blogs in the past, you know, you start it, you're super excited and motivated, and then you just stop. You know, you lose the motivation. You realize that it takes a lot of work. You're publishing it in a public forum where anybody can read and criticize. So it was intimidating because I was like, who's going to care to read what I have to say? But I was in a time in my life where, you know, I was no longer a student. I wasn't married with children. So I was kind of looking for this community that was hard to find in Florence. I mean, this is before you could go on Facebook groups and just say, hey, I'm lonely, let's meet up, you know? Yeah. It was a lot more difficult. You know, you had to join, okay, there were local expat groups and things like that, but that came with its own kind of crazy ball game. And then also just getting to connect with people who were at the same stage of life as me, you know, in this kind of perilous, I'm in my 20s, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm working to get my visa. I wanted to share these experiences, also because I wanted to meet more people. But also at that time I learned Italian. So I was thinking, my God, there's so many interesting things here in Florence, you know, events and different artists.
There's so much happening.
Yeah, there's so much happening even back then. And I felt like I just wanted to share it. I mean, we're lucky enough in Florence that we have, you know, the wonderful resource that is the Florentine, but I was just thinking like, wow, it would be interesting. I always enjoyed reading other people's perspectives of life in Italy. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to do the same. And it's probably only going to be my dad that reads it. But okay. And it was also, I have to say, like a kind of a golden age of blogging a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
It was the time when I first moved there and I was reading these long form blogs of people who lived in Florence and who maybe don't live there anymore, but they were just so beautifully written. Yeah. And, you know, just really sharing and being open, honest, and vulnerable about like you know, how the difficulty of truly living in another country. And I found that really inspiring. You know, this was a time when you didn't need to include a bunch of extremely filtered photos to get visitation. You know, people just wanted to read your words. Yes. So I loved, you know, for me, I thought, okay, this is part of a community of bloggers who weren't expecting to get paid for this or expecting that it would turn into a profession, but simply that they wanted to share, you know, their experiences of living in Italy. So that's how it started in 2012, more or less, when we met. Mm-hmm. I started in 2011, but then, you know, it evolved. And then I've been doing it ever since. So
Georgette, am I wrong? Am I wrong to think that you have about 800 posts?
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
I was trying to, wow. You know, I think it would be a beautiful book one day, you know, to put all this together, because isn't it interesting how much our lives have changed and how much the world has, well, now during the pandemic, of course, we will get to that as well. But to think that I think people wanted content and information, real information. Now I feel everything is these little bits of 30 seconds, attention span.
Right.
I think there is definitely a change in our society as well.
With the arrival of social media and the way that people process information is so quick now, I mean,
Yes.
like, again, before, when I was reading blogs and I was reading articles, it wasn't uncommon to read even a 5,000 word essay. And
Yes.
now I'm surprised if anybody reads past the first paragraph.
Yes.
But because you have to dedicate time for it, and we're used to processing a massive amount of information in any given moment. So but I still enjoy that. I've never, I still try. My blog posts are extremely long, especially for what is considered SEO friendly.
Yeah.
But I don't care. I'm like, if you like it, read it. If you don't want to read it, you want to be part of it, that's okay too. And hopefully you get something out of it. And people give me ideas all the time too. I get a lot of people who are like, oh my gosh, I really would love to know about such and such place, or what are some areas of Tuscany that you really love? And, so the inspiration is always there. The difficulty is finding the time.
Yes, of course. Of course.
I want to do it right. And but I love it. So
yeah,
not gonna stop anytime soon.
Of course. What I love is how many followers you have, and really people of all ages. I meet young kids on Instagram who tell me that they follow you, but also people who have been to Florence maybe 50 years going back and forth. And this brings me to an idea for one of your next blogs. We have 2 mud angels with us today on Zoom.
I think I overheard that.
Yes. And, wouldn't it be wonderful to hear their stories? I was really lucky in 2016 to have a dinner with the mud angels from Florida State University. And it was one of the nights I will never forget. Because they came to Florence as these young kids. They were supposed to be here for a year. In 1966, and the flood came like their first month here. And to see this group of now people who are in their 70s that bonded over this experience for their lifetime was just, brings me to tears every time I think about it. So,
well, anybody who's interested in, talking to me, maybe send Paula your information, and I would be more than happy. Are you kidding me? Also, I have to say, I have a personal obsession with the history of Florence, like probably you all do, but also especially the flood around that time. Like I've written about it on the blog, but I've also, I just find it really, it's incredible to think of Florence under a blanket of mud and sludge and what was going on during that time and how people were dealing with day-to-day life. Like I find it anytime I get a chance to get a first-person story, it's amazing.
Yes, yes. Okay, so that might be something that, this conversation today will open up.
It'll spur some new articles. Wonderful.
Yes. So I'm sure everyone in this room wants to know your favorite things in Florence. So how about we limit ourselves to your 3 favorite spots or places in the city, or just what is it that you love?
So hard because there's so many. It's really hard to limit it just because it changes. Every day I find a new place or rediscover an old loved place. But I guess one of them, if I had to limit it to 3, I would say generally the area around Sant'Ambrogio. So it's one neighborhood of the city that's famous for its covered market. And I say Sant'Ambrogio in that area because, of course, people know about the market. Of course, people know about Cibreo, which is a very famous restaurant over there. And they have it's kind of like a Cibreo, the Bermuda Triangle. There's like the Cibreo Triangle because they have like this casual lunch place. They have a cafe. They have a really nice shop with like higher end where they sell some of their products, which has the Cibbio, the shop. Actually has one of the best. We always get our bread from them.
Yes, so, I know, and yes,
delicious, and it's affordable. You can get a half loaf, you can get a quarter loaf. It doesn't matter if you're by yourself. So I love the fact that they're so flexible with things like that. But they moved the flea market there. I don't know if it was 2 years ago, maybe last year. It used to be on Piazza dei Ciompi, and they moved it over there. And I love taking people there. Because it's just wandering through. Now it looks a little bit like a Parisian market. They have this structure. But I just love wandering there. I always find something for the house, whether it's, old photographs or, kind of a beautiful lamp or even just knickknacks or old postcards even. I sent my family, they probably are wondering what the heck this is because instead of sending like these beautiful modern postcards, I'm sending them like ones from the 1960s or that I find at the market that somebody's already written sometimes. In Italian. But it's such a joy, the fact that you can go to this one neighborhood, and see the hustle and bustle of the market and, see how everybody's talking to one another, getting their fruit and vegetables. But it's not only that, it's an education really, because you're seeing not only how people interact, but, coming as a person from Florence who doesn't have any familial ties, often I wouldn't know how to make a lot of things. So I'd be asking questions like, how do I cook this? They'd write down the recipes for me. They'd save food for me. Luca Minoni, the butcher inside the cupboard area, he just opened a terrace. So if you go into the Santa Ambrogio market and there's this butcher shop, and then on top, you have a terrace where you can eat. Not a lot of people know about it. So it's like this own private VIP, super casual, of course, place where you can enjoy some fresh charcuterie, looking over the market. So there's all these hidden gems in and within the market, but also just directly surrounding it. So, I'm biased because we have our home in the Old Tarno, the other side of the river, which is another neighborhood I, adore, of course. But I say Santa Ambrogio because being on that side of the river, the Duomo side of the river, it's remarkable that such an authentic area has remained the way it is. It is filled with Florentines and foreigners alike. And so it deserves the spot. I'd say.
I love it.
Another area is a little bit outside of the city, which I'm sure you know, Paola, Villa Demidoff.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah. It's not technically in the center of Florence. It's about a 25-minute, maybe longer bus ride. But what's really special, so I don't remember from the top of my head all of the historical, it's obviously an ancient park, basically, that was owned by a couple of different families. And it's really famous because they have that beautiful Apennine Colossus by Gian Bologna. Yeah. So you go into this park and it's beautiful because the thing about Florence, there are some green spaces, right? We have the Rose Garden, we have Cascine, we have, other bits and pieces, but it's not like other cities. Like even where we are now, it's just a different vibe. But going to Villa Demidoff, it's kind of that big rolling hills that we really miss living in the center of Florence. I love living in the center of Florence, but it's just nice to be away from the city, close enough to ride by bus, and then see this massive, beautifully carved statue kind of within a lily pond. It's just incredible that we have access to that. And it's, it could be part of your.
I love this choice.
Well, it's one of those things that I think lockdown in Italy was extremely difficult for all of us. It was a very tough 2 months of truly being in our homes. And one thing that I really missed was nature. Like everybody else, I was kind of whimsically looking out of the window, just thinking about all the, walks I wanted to do and all the places I wanted to discover. So, that's one of those special places that I want people to know about more because it's not always that obvious. So my third and last choice is a museum. And it's San Marco Museum, which, because a lot of people don't go to San Marco. It's funny, Piazza San Marco is not one of the most attractive areas of Florence. It's the hub of where the buses are, essentially. It's near the Accademia. There's actually it's just kind of sad. There's a cafe, Grand Cafe there that's shutting down after 150 years of business because of the pandemic, because they can't afford to stay open. And now that means 35 people are out of jobs. So you can see how the pandemic is now, even after so long, really affecting these, not only new businesses, but historic businesses.
Yes, and it is so sad when we lose these jewels, because they were truly that flavor of Florence that is truly no longer around, you
Yeah,
know?
it was the, I was reading, I mean, I hope this is true, but apparently it was the oldest cafe after Geely.
Wow. Wow.
And,
Possible.
and they just renovated it like a year ago. They put in, I
Wow.
don't even know how many millions. So it's sad. It's like nobody expected, obviously, this to happen, and this is the result. But, you know, Piazza San Marco was to me a bit of a hidden gem. Not only can you arrive there easier because, you know, the buses all arrive there, but San Marco Museum has always been, it's not the easiest museum to go to on your own. There's not a lot of descriptions in English. You know, there's a problem with some of that, you know, with museums in Italy where depending on the place, it doesn't always have user friendly. If you're going on your own, you have to do a lot of research, but it's so worth getting a guide to go to San Marco because it's fascinating. You know, it's this Dominican monastery that is so well preserved. And I don't know if some of you ladies have heard, you know, the story about Savonarola, which was the fury monk who caused a lot of chaos during the Renaissance. And so it's really, to me, to see all of the cells and how they were decorated and just the stories behind the paintings by Beato Angelico and seeing the Last Supper and things like that. I just find it such a really cool place, not only for the art, but just for the location itself even.
True.
And you know, funny enough, every time I've been there, I see a lot of French tourists. So it must have been mentioned in a lot of French guidebooks, but well worth it. Well worth it, and go with a guide. And I was actually lucky enough to go to a dinner there once. They had this beautiful dinner in the courtyard. I think it was a couple of years ago, and it was magical, just as magical at night.
Yes. You know, there is that beautiful facade really left of the pharmacy of San Marco. Also, the Via
Yes.
Cavour side. And
Yeah.
I don't know much about it, but I can just imagine what a special place that would have been. But I think
Yeah.
it closed many, many years before we got to Florence.
It's
So,
kind of, and it's kind of interesting because it's like when you're walking towards Piazza della Libertà,
yes.
and then you just spot kind of like these marble entryway to what would have been the pharmacy there. But it's so beautiful. I always take a picture of it when I'm walking past because I
Yes.
think it's incredible. Just kind of like I don't know, the skeleton of what was there, you know?
Yes. I think someone wrote they missed your second choice, the name. So it is Villa Demidoff.
Billy Demidoff or Pratolino Park. It's also the other name that they have for it. So
Yeah.
it's not always open. They usually open in the summer months on the weekends. But it's gorgeous, well worth a walk. And they sometimes host events there too. It's a perfect place for a picnic as well. So.
Georgette, didn't they close the park last year because they found the Second World War bomb?
Oh, could be. I mean, this is Florence, so.
They had to excavate this bomb before they
Yeah.
could go
No,
and
no, I'm gonna have to Google that after because yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case.
yes. Talking about art, I wanted to ask you the question that everyone always asks me, and I can never really answer it. Who is your favorite Renaissance artist?
Oh my gosh, it's so hard.
I know.
Yeah, it's well, you know, I mean, like everybody, I have different people that I find intriguing for different reasons. But if I had to put a face to a name, a number one name, I would probably choose Artemisia Gentileschi, you know, because she's female and she was kind of an icon during her time because of, you know, when she was painting and when she was, I think she was one of the first women to be accepted into the Accademia di Belle Arti. So already that during the Renaissance was incredible, but also just her style of art has always been really interesting to me. Like I've been lucky enough to go on some tours to visit some of her pieces, even recently in the new art, I think it's the Last Supper in Santa Maria Novella Church.
Yeah.
So I got to see that when they unveiled it, which was incredible. But I always felt like she always has this kind of theme too about like women conquering men and, you know, the Judith versus Holofernes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's always kind of violent and interesting, but you know, I've always been the kind of person that the way I connect through art is the backstory. You know, I want to hear about the artist. So, you know, her story in particular is super interesting. You know, she had her own Me Too movement experience. She was raped when she was 17 and went through a trial where they tortured her to see if she was telling the truth. So already when you understand the context behind her work, it's fascinating. You know, it makes you go there and look at each piece and wonder what was going through her mind when she was doing it. You know, I'm always thinking about that. And I've always been really fascinated too by Renaissance personalities, you know, like the Michelangelo or for example, the competition for the baptistry door, the second door between Brunelleschi and Ghiberti, because I always thought like the egos on these men when they were doing, you know, when they were trying to win these very coveted jobs in Florence. And every time you read about it, you hear a different angle, you know, oh, Brunelleschi lost and they were supposed to work together and he decided his ego couldn't take it and he wasn't going to be part of the project anymore. So I really love, if I could just read all the stories about like what the apprentice saw that they were doing, those are my favorite kind of perspectives. You know, not the glory ones, but maybe well, you didn't know that Michelangelo did this and that. So,
you know, Georgette, interesting you bring Artemisia Gentileschi on, because, you know, someone that you introduced me to, Anthony Bourdain.
Oh, yeah.
When he was in Florence, we talked about Artemisia, and when he was telling me, wow, you know, her life is so hard and everything. But you know what I love about her life stories, Artemisia was really well respected during her lifetime. And she was paid sometimes 8 times more than her male colleagues for doing her frescoes, you know. So she does get the recognition and fame during her lifetime. So yeah, I think, you know, we think of these women as completely forgotten, and they were forgotten, of course, in history. But during their own lifetime, many of them lived full and very rich life. I mean, she was a mother as well. So, you know, there is so much to be said. But yes, the background stories are everything.
Yeah, it's, I mean, that's why, you know, people like you in learning and getting the chance to sit there and listen to these stories, for me, you know, I would never be satisfied just going to a museum and looking at art. You know, I need that context.
Yes. You know, I think having a guide is definitely a big bonus. You know, I was in Istanbul with a group of friends, and for some reason, when we were in Hagia Sophia and we also saw the Kora Church, the guide from Istanbul kept referring to Florence and making, you know, connections to the city of Florence, and he was always wrong. And I was like, I was going to turn around, you know, he was with this American couple, and I want to just tell him like, listen, buddy, you know, you stick to Istanbul, okay? Stick to Constantinople. Don't go out of your, you know, area of knowledge, because, you know, it's guys that are really truly specialized, you know. Anyway, let's move on because we have so much more. I have so many questions for you. So you had to leave Florence.
I was exiled, everybody.
You had to be in exile, like just like Dante and everyone else. You were simply sent into exile, and you are in Switzerland. But you did manage to buy your own place. So tell us about the move. Tell us about, was it bittersweet to leave Florence? Because you do have a tie in the city now. You have your own place that you can come back to. So how did that work?
You know, 2020 has been a crazy year for everybody, including me. You know, in the beginning of the year, I never thought I would even think about moving from Florence. I mean, it's never been, you know, I put 13 years of my life into this city because I truly care about living there full time. And I still consider it home, despite being in Switzerland now. So it was really simply kind of one of those life moments when you kind of think about the next 20 years. You know, now I'm 36 and I'm married, and my husband is a biomedical engineer, and he, you know, we both have done pretty good in our prospective careers, you know, doing what we do and everything like that. But even before the pandemic, in Italy, it's very tough, you know, moving and living and working, and financial aspect of it. You know, if you're not coming from family money and you're working on your own, you know, it's tough. It's tough to save the money you need. It's tough to navigate the system. Just, I mean, like anywhere really, but maybe a little bit more red tape is involved than what you might normally be used to. So, you know, we simply had this opportunity for his work, my husband's work, to come to Switzerland to work. And I'll never forget, actually, it's interesting. I wrote about this on the blog as well, of when it was right before the coronavirus really took over Italy. We're talking about the end of February. And so we were currently in France visiting his family. And already there was a lot of tensions during that time, because it's weird because it seems like 2 years ago, but it was just this February, same year. And we were sitting there and discussing that. And, I always said I was open to it. I always did the good wife thing of being like, yeah, I want you to, he's always been such a wonderful supporter of what I do, and which is amazing. And, the fact that I'm here and there and traveling all throughout Florence and Italy and the world, basically. And I wanted to simply do the same for him and kind of say, listen, I'm there for you. And, if you have this opportunity that you want to pursue, I'll be there, even if it's hard for me, because Florence is so much part of my identity. I didn't really expect it to happen. There was not that he isn't amazing, he's brilliant, but we were both at that. In Italy, it's very easy to be really comfortable. You finally get into a rhythm, you got your job, you're fine, you love it, you have your friends. So we were really at that place of like total comfort zone, thing. But, there was a couple of things that had happened that made us kind of rethink a couple of things. And so it was just one of those times where you just sit down and, we got to try it. We have to at least go and see what it's like to live somewhere else and work somewhere else and be close to Italy, because that was my caveat. They said, listen, I don't want to go far away. I don't want to be outside of the EU. And I want to be, within the Europe continent, of course. And, it just seemed like a perfect middle ground. Everything happened so quickly between him getting the job and then us finding, because before we were always looking for a house, but it's very expensive and the red tape and you're not Italian, my husband got citizenship earlier this year, but I still don't have citizenship. So it was hard to find a home and get approved for a mortgage and do all of those things. So as you know, I know you've done this, Paula, so we were in that same boat. But because then the shift changed from, okay, I'm going to find that like bigger family home, to a smaller home that we would use when we're in Florence, it was easier. And so right after lockdown in Italy, like right after, we went to go see a home in May, and we just loved it. It was perfect. It was near in the neighborhood we loved in the Oltarno, and it was easy, seemed easy for parking and things like that, which parking is another nightmare. You get me started on that. But it's, I've said we wanted to have this physical tie to Florence. I didn't want to have to go back to the city that I'd called home for so many years and stay with friends and stay with a hotel. It just felt weird. Yeah. So that was, okay, well, we have this investment and we want to live there when we're there, and we go back to Florence. Now it's been once a month. So I'm going back to Florence on Friday for a couple of weeks, and it's great. It's only 5.5 hours. So I live in Zug, Switzerland. I don't know if anybody knows. No, I didn't even know Zug existed before we moved here.
Me too. You introduced me to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm introducing a lot of people to it, because it's like, everybody's like, wait, you live in Zurich? And I'm like, no. It's about 20 minutes south. Yeah, it's a completely different place. And but what's great is that usually pre-pandemic, there are 3 flights a day from Florence to Zurich, so it's super easy. But there's also, the train is only 5.5 hours away, and there's only one change. So plane, train, car. I have my driver's license now in Switzerland, so I have all the ways to get where I need to go. And now we've been here since mid-July, since mid-July, him a little bit before. And yeah, I'm adjusting. It's like I'm starting all over again, like a little kid, a little different than my start in Florence, but it's still really nerve-wracking to move to a new country. And then also, hold ties to your city. I'm handling Girl in Florence, doing my work, opening up Girl in Zug, and trying to manage everything, and expectations as well from here. And just kind of winging it, because that's how life is in 2020. You cannot make plans, and your expectations have to stay quite normal.
Georgette, what's interesting now, it occurs to me that life has taken you to places that you didn't really expect.
Yeah.
Like, you didn't really have this dream of studying abroad in Italy, and then you made Florence your home. And then, actually, Patricia is saying, I thought Zug was your clever way of referring to Zurich.
I seriously
Me
think
too.
everyone.
For the longest time, I thought it was like the cool name for Zurich, but it's a
Yeah,
different town.
no, it's a tiny yet beautiful town. I mean, it's just like Florence is beautiful, Zug is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Flowers and plants and views and mountains, and we're next to the lake. And it's 20 minutes to Zurich, so
You know
it's a
what's
good.
funny? I think they definitely need a girl in Zug. I think they might make you a mayor soon because I think you're going to be promoting this town that no one's ever heard of. So that's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's really interesting because when I first moved here, I did, I tried to do what you always do. I'm kind of trying to make new friends, and I've met some Italians here, and I've introduced myself to the tourism board. So I'm trying to do those steps that I did in Italy. And people have been really receptive over here because people don't know about Zug. I mean, when you look up Zug on the internet, it's tax haven, cryptocurrency capital. It's not exactly the most positive, vibe. So, I mean, that's what I thought when I came here. I was like, oh my God, but it's not like that at all. I mean, there's 120 nationalities that live here, so I'm surrounded by a lot of diversity. People speak multiple languages. So, I don't speak Swiss German yet. Probably they never will. But it's great. I'm using my French and using my Italian, and it's really interesting. And it's so many, and I'm finding Florence connections here too. Like just the other day, we were having ramen at this restaurant, and the guy was telling us he studied art in Florence, and he was showing us his art. So you just never know where the connections are going to lead. So
I think that is the part of our new world. Wherever you go,
yeah.
I think we're just living in such a global society, and I think having a connection to Florence, place of your own. Having just bought my own house, it's really it's such a tie to a place. It becomes a whole different feeling. Just for example, my apartment in Florence, I was never able to hang paintings on the walls, because it was like an old palace, and now it's like, oh my God, I can do whatever I want. So I'm really glad you made the decision. I think it also made your decision a little bit easier to make the decision to go from Florence because you had a little piece of it to hold on to.
Yeah, it was, I think it was kind of my husband's way of convincing me too. It was kind of like, well, we'll get a place here. And then anytime you feel lonely, we'll come back. And
Yeah.
because, it was hard. I don't think people know, I wasn't sure how it was going to work, like how am I going to still do what I do and be in Switzerland? And now that I'm living it, and I'm figuring it out as it goes. It's not perfect, but it's definitely what we needed. And, I'm surrounded by so much nature now. It's incredible. So I'm getting all of those walks that I didn't get during the lockdown. And, what I love about Florence is also what is kind of my biggest problem, which is I can't say no. So I have this trouble, I don't think I'm the only one in life, but when people are like, hey, will you do this? Or hey, will you come to that? I'm like, of course, I don't want to miss out. And it was overwhelming sometimes, so it's a little bit good to go back, do what I need to do in Florence, get to see the people I love and support the businesses that I adore. But then I get taken out and I'm not distracted by constantly, all the things that are going on in Florence. I'm able to kind of sanely tell people about them. Oh, I see Ginger's over there too.
There she is. Hi, Ginger. Oh my gosh.
My dog is a central part in what I do as well, because I'm always talking about her. She's a little beagle.
Yeah. And I think Ginger has many, fans thanks to you.
It's funny because we live through our dog, pets are they're family members. So
yeah, I should bring Casanova to join us.
I'm sure he has something to say.
But there he is.
Okay, that's adorable. He's literally part of this conversation.
He's totally.
He's judging us.
I think he's fascinated by you. I think he's been just very careful, listening in. That's all you have to say. So I'm super excited that Casanova made his first appearance on Zoom. He actually never appears on these. He's a gentleman. Casanova is a gentleman.
Yeah, well, with a name like that comes with a bit of mess, right?
His name fits him perfectly. You know, that brings me to a whole new question when you talk about Florence. And what do you think? How will this city change for after this pandemic? Do you think this change will last a long time, or will it go back to the mass tourism and everything else in just a year or so?
You know, that's a really good question, Paula. And I know that you've talked about that. I know there was the Florentine chat that they had with you and several other guides about, you know, tourism in Florence and things like that. And I've been a part of a few panels with different people around the city talking about the future of Florence and what people think will happen versus what they want to happen, because the complicated thing about Florence is that, yes, it's known as being this massively touristic city, you know, relying on millions of people visiting and supporting it every year. And you've just cut that down to like maybe 10% now, 10, 20%. So it's a massive blow to anybody who works in tourism, you included, Paula, I'm sure, and me as well. I mean, I'm a secondary factor, but, you know, a lot of my clients and social media, things like that, they're hotels, you know, they're artisans. So it's been really tough to survive simply. You know, I am an eternal optimist at the end of the day. I think Florence has survived several floods, Second World War, and all kinds of things physically and literally thrown at it. I have no doubt that the pandemic will be another one of those situations, because quite frankly, you know, I'm very proud, I think like a lot of people who live in Italy, of how Italy has handled the situation.
True.
Because I was there physically,
Yeah.
you know, we were
Yeah.
living through the lockdown, and just seeing the fact, because, you know, Italians have that kind of reputation as not following the rules or being skeptical or kind of looking for the way out or the way around, you know, I mean, how many times I got cut in front of at the supermarket by an old lady, for example. So it's, you know, the pandemic proved everyone wrong. You know, it was kind of like everybody started to listen, and now, unfortunately, there are the after effects of prolonged lack of clients, you know, so places are shutting down like we were speaking to before. But there's also the other question of like, well, what do we want to see? You know, the air quality apparently in Florence has been better from what I've been reading. And, you know, there has been this atmosphere of, oh, I can breathe. You know, I used to do tricks in Florence. Like I'd wake up early, I'd go out at certain times of the day because I kind of wanted to avoid the crowds, you know, with Ponte Vecchio, or because I lived in the Ponte Vecchio before. Now I'm a little bit further away, but it's, you know, it's hard to live in Florence full time as a resident within the historical center. You know, you kind of do have to battle around the big groups. I mean, 30 people blocking your way, taking photos. And there is that feeling of, those are residents and those are tourists, and it's not always a healthy balance.
Yeah.
So there's this talk and challenge of, okay, well, you know, Florence is lucky enough to have a couple of industries. I mean, things like General Electric, or even companies like where my husband was working, it's not like the city only relies on tourism, but it's kind of like, well, what about the next steps? You know, Italians supporting Italians. How are we going to weather the next 12 months? You know, how are we going to be able to keep these places alive? So I mean, I unfortunately think there are going to be a lot of casualties, economic casualties from the pandemic. But I hope, you know, of course, like everybody else, and I know the mayor's talked about this, and the culture minister, and things like that, of just a healthier balance of livability. You know, not having the center of the city gutted for Airbnb apartments, having people, more supermarkets or more places where people can buy their goods, because if everything turns into a hip cafe or restaurant, okay, you know, it's the Disneyland effect. So, you know, there is this chance to kind of maybe look at zoning again and decide that only a certain percentage are going to go to those sorts of enterprises, and the other ones, let's reserve those for locals. Or making sure that these historic businesses have some sort of help on the way, whether it's loans or through other means. But I think you know, obviously people like us, we encourage people to travel in small groups. We encourage people to think about their impact when they're here. It's not always possible, of course. But there's a chance for the city to kind of set the tone, because I will say this, living in a city like Zug, which is nothing like Florence or Zurich, it's quite remarkable to see how a city plans for the people living and working there versus the tourists.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
the level, the quality and consistency of keeping up with the streets and the lights and the parks and the services for residents versus not really having that. And you kind of, and you love and you live in Florence, but it's despite all of those issues. Never finding parking, never finding affordable housing, getting kicked out of your place because somebody wants to start Airbnb. Having a bar below you, blasting music until 4 a.m. and not being able to do about it. So there's a lot of those, I guess, normal city issues. But there's also this chance to, you know, the city has done a lot of things, like made a lot of streets pedestrian to make it easier on traffic flow, but then also installed many bike paths. And you get the feeling like there, you know, Florence to me has improved a lot since I first moved there in 2005. I mean, the Piazza Santa Maria Novella being one of them. If you looked at some of these squares before versus now, it's incredible.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the outward appearance. I mean, you need to have the inside of the places just as healthy as the outside. And that means viable jobs, residents who live there and feel comfortable there. So the balance needs to be healthier. But I think it's possible. I don't know about you, Paula, but I do think that, well, one, people are grateful for tourists again, whereas before it's kind of like, eh.
Exactly, exactly. I
Yeah.
remain very optimistic. I feel people will be back as soon as the borders are opened and Florence
Yeah.
is there in all of its, her beauty waiting for everyone. I did notice also when I do go to cafes, especially right in downtown, how, they were sometimes so rude and they would be like very
Yes.
rude.
Yeah.
Now they'll actually look you in the eye and they say hello, So there is that human aspect that is been recovered as we went through all of this, So I think it's going
Totally.
to, I hope, maybe things will become more sustainable. I think also many people are reinventing whole new careers. I
Yeah.
think maybe also finding happier ways to really, I think this was a chance to all the world to kind of have this pause button and then be like asking yourself question, what do I want to do next? Is it the path that I'm on? Is this a good one,
Yeah.
Many people
Yeah.
got
A lot
happy
of
with their
people maybe
jobs,
didn't have
doing
that.
hated what they do, and now it's like all of a sudden they have a chance to maybe do something else. So it's been a gift, I think, given to us as well. Um, anyway, I think we will do all we can for Florence because there's so many people who love it. And I always
Uh-huh.
feel privileged to work with people, on my tours or people who were donors for restoration projects who really felt like they are part of the Florentine life and Florentines in their heart, even though they live somewhere, across the world. So um, I think, this actually brings me to our last question for the evening, which is many people wrote me when we advertised our interview tonight, and they said, we are planning to move to Florence next year or year after. So what will be your advice to people who plan to move to the city? What do you think they should be thinking about? Even like now that you have your own home, how
Yeah.
hard it is to actually buy a property. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's hard. It's really, really hard. I would say, well, first of all, good luck to anyone who's trying it because it is hard. I mean, to move to another country where you might not be speaking that language fluently and trying to do all of the bureaucracy of moving your life abroad is an incredible feat in itself. So anybody who manages to do it, I'm always very impressed.
Yeah.
I would first say come with realistic expectations. Number one, just because I think, sometimes it's a good thing that we all share such positive content because people need more positivity right now. There's no doubt about it. But I think there's always two sides to every equation. It's important to understand that there's going to be a lot of hurdles. You might arrive at your apartment that you're staying at, and then you realize the internet hasn't been installed, and it might not be there for another week. Like, you can't freak out and make something happen at a drop of a hat in Italy. You need patience. Patience is the number one thing because it's going to be frustrating. There's going to be those moments of, I think a lot, especially Americans, we're so used to kind of getting what we want when we need it. And, we don't, time is money. And there's kind of like those expectations. And Italy just doesn't work like that. And that's partly, you don't move to Italy because you want things to be exactly how they are where you're from. You move there because you want something different, right? You're thinking about, oh my gosh, I love the slow pace of life in Italy. I love the fact that people have these personal connections. But then you have to expect that also comes with delays. So I always tell people, please check your expectations at the door. Give yourself some time, because everybody's heard or maybe read of you have the honeymoon period, you have the I hate everything period, getting used to new life. And we've all went through that. I have gone through periods of time where I hated Florence because maybe something snafu happened with work or whatever. It's just life circumstances. So I would say do a lot of research. When it comes to buying a home, hire some help, whether it's a lawyer or somebody who can help you navigate the tricky intricacies of buying a property. So one of my jobs is I'm an editor of an online magazine called Italy Magazine. And we have a section on the magazine that's all about buying property in Italy. And part of it is, this is something we added last year, is a section called True Stories of Buying Property in Italy. And it's not written by us, it's written by people who have done it. Well, now I should write one too, because now we bought one. But a lot of stories where people just tell it how it is, on how they found their property, what went on during the process, of renovating a property from scratch that isn't exactly like the Under the Tuscan Sun experience. It's a little more tough than that.
Yeah.
Still funny though. You have to come in there with a sense of humor. But yeah, it's going to be, I would say always give yourself more of a financial cushion than you want. And don't be scared to admit that it might not be the right idea for you too. Because I think we kind of set it in ourselves. And I know I'm like this too sometimes, where I'm like, if I make a decision, I got to stick to it. This is the decision. And it doesn't have to, life isn't like that. 2020 has proved something. It is the fact that we cannot control everything. We cannot control what's happening yesterday, today, or tomorrow. And maybe that's good for us, because a lot of us were control freaks. So we want to plan everything. And I think it's really great that, you have this, if you come to a place like Italy and you're thinking this is going to be my home, it might be wonderful as a second home, maybe coming 3 months a year. Give yourself the opportunity to see what is the right duration of time. And also, something to remember too about living in Italy is that, you're not going to have the base of family and friend support around you. Italians have had that. Obviously, they're born there, they live there, they have their friends and family there. It's not, I've been lucky enough that I've been able to find my community in Italy, and it's a wonderful, vibrant, creative, collaborative community, but it took years. It wasn't within 1 year. It took like at least 6 years, and maybe it's a little easier now through the internet, thankfully. But you have to know that that's going to be tough. I'm trying to tell people that in a nice way, just so that they don't come here, they set up everything and they're like, well, now what? When it's all the Under the Tuscan dream is going to come to me. And I'm like, yeah, but you just moved to a city. Yeah. What are you going to bring to the city?
It takes time. It takes time to establish relationships, especially in a city like Florence. I think it's hard because Florentines don't really want to expand their circle of friends. They already are best friends with their, friends from the kindergarten. So they have these really close communities, and it takes, I remember many lonely days, many lonely Sundays when I got there, So if you don't have, I was at Syracuse University, so I had my classmates, I had my entire school was this like beautiful island of safety, But if you don't have that, I think it's really hard. Georgette, the first thing that you were thinking about, finding the place to live and stuff. Mark Twain, I don't know if our listeners know about this, but when he wrote his memoir or his biography or memoirs, he actually left it to his publisher, and he said, you can only print this 100 years from now. So he actually left something behind him, and he wanted it to be opened 100 years later. And when his publishers told him, Mark, what are you doing? 100 years later, now who will care? He said, it'll all be as relevant in 100 years as it is today. So one of the things he had was he describes his Florentine landlords.
Oh my gosh, I really need to hear what Florentine landlord is like.
So I was like, when I was reading the description of his landlady in Florence, I was like, oh my God, this reminds me of the first landlady I had in Florence. And it was, this like actually my second landlady, which was like, this really horrible experience. And then I found an amazing Florentine lady who I stayed in all of her apartments for 15 years. So I think, yes, I think you need a kind of this mixture of luck and enthusiasm and,
Yeah.
just really pure. I think when you do move to another country, you simply have to have this like child in you and be like, okay,
Yeah.
let's go with the flow and see what life brings me next.
Yeah, and you got to put yourself out there too, that's part
Yes,
of it. It's like,
yes,
I'm a naturally shy person, but, going to the same cafe over and over again, getting to, asking questions in Italian, it goes a long way. I mean, if
yes.
you're consistent, you can break a Florentine, you just got to show up every day, force it, and then eventually someone's going to crack a smile and you'll start a conversation. So,
Yes. And I think once they do accept you as a friend, they're never going to let you go. So that's the best part. Okay, I think we have actually, oh my gosh, we have used our time, and it's almost 8 o'clock in Italy. So what I wanted to ask you is, should we see if anyone has any questions? Let's take a look at the chat and see the comments. Is that okay? And maybe Jared, you read them and see what you want to answer to. Okay.
let's see. Mainly, what is the future of Florence, which I think we kind of talked about. Well, we can go on. I mean, that's another chat. We could do a whole other Zoom call about more about that. Yeah, I hope this whole historic business get a chance to survive. When it comes to like the historic businesses in Florence too, I feel like all of us want those businesses to stay. Like nobody wants to hear about an iconic cafe or a place to remain open. It's just, I think too, that it's so hard because I think of like the funds that a place needs to stay open. I mean, already, especially at those bigger cafes that are enormous and have, like the one I was talking about before, the Cafe San Marco, 35 dependents. So can you imagine they're gearing for all those people that are visiting the academia, right? And partly it's geography. So
Yeah.
the fact that you can't park in Piazza San Marco, the buses are less because of coronavirus. And so there's all of these factors that are part of the reason why a place survives or fails. And nobody expected this to happen. So I think that's when I feel like, we can't step in, or the country, but it's hard. These things are much more complicated.
But Georgette, I think this brings me to San Marco Cafe. It's a horrible example of our times we're living in today. But remember the Macchiaioli Cafe, or no, sorry, the Cafe in Piazza della Repubblica, Giube Rosse.
Yeah,
Where an amazing art movement started in the 19th century. They
yeah.
got to business couple years ago. So I think there is something to be said about these, historical brands not being able to. It's not sustainable anymore. Anyway, let's go back to other questions.
Okay, somebody asked, what is your writing process? Spontaneous, laborious, many drafts? Very good question. It's funny. It's really,
Yes.
it's definitely changed over the years, and it comes because of practice. In the beginning, as any blogger would do, I just write the first draft, I'd publish it. It was full of mistakes. It's a mess basically. But I did it because I was like, okay, this is what a blog is for. It's what you do. I would say that my approach is kind of like how I write an article for I work as a freelance writer sometimes too, and I write articles for Italy Magazine, is I always, if I'm feeling it in the moment, especially in the morning seems to be the time when I'm most creative. You have to kind of know yourself too. That's the thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's, I know that I'm useless after lunch. For lunch, it's like I got to go take a walk. I need to do something kind of non-thought, without much of a thought process. But I always, if I'm in the moment, I try to at least write down the first draft, and that's just whatever I'm thinking. It might be full of mistakes. I need to go back and check, but I think that because, the way the internet is now, with having so much information out there, and not all of it, I'm not an expert in every subject either. But, I really try to use a bit of journalistic integrity and really do some fact checking before I publish anything, because that's the thing. It's like, once it's out there, people take you at your word.
Yeah.
And I've already seen so much non-journalistic integrity out there that I feel like, you know, the least I can do is fact check, and it might take me triple the time to publish the article, but at least I know that I've done my best, and then I'm transparent about it. So for me, yeah, I tend to write longer articles, especially regarding travel, but you know, some articles might take you an hour, some might take a day. It just depends on the subject matter and how casual it is too, you know, versus a really informative itinerary on Gambassi Terme versus, you know, my thoughts on moving to Switzerland took me an hour. But then of course I go back and I revise, and then maybe I think about it again and I add something and I take out something. So yeah, it's a process. That's for sure.
I think with everything else in life. I think Patricia Jeremiah had a question. You probably know her in person as well. Patricia is asking, what would you recommend to someone who would like to rent an apartment in Florence? We all know it's you, Patricia, but doesn't want to contribute to the Airbnb situation where a lot of apartments are being gutted, all their beauty replaced with IKEA furniture, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I had nothing against it. When Airbnb first began, I thought it was brilliant. You know, I remember being, you know, in my 20s and going to Amsterdam and staying in a really cheap place, thinking that was crazy. You know, I was like, wow, this is such a wonderful opportunity. And I understand, especially for families who need a kitchen and need a little bit more space. I mean, there's no problem with the idea of Airbnb, really. It's just the fact that what my problem is, you know, especially living in a country as regulated as Italy, I always have a problem with people making billions of euros in revenue and saying, oh, it's not really my responsibility to check to see if somebody's paying their taxes. Because I feel like, as somebody who works for herself for so many years, it's my responsibility, right? You know, but I feel like they should take some onus on that, because it really changes the fabric of a city. You know, we've seen it everywhere: Barcelona, Paris, Florence. And so if you can, I mean, anytime you're a person who's going to stay longer in Florence and create a lasting relationship with the landlord, that helps everyone more. If you know, you're not going to be the one-stop shop, you know, visiting a place for a day and then moving on and not really caring about what happens next. But you know, it might be a little bit harder to find that gem of a landlord that isn't the crazy first one that we've all had.
Yes.
It's worth going through an agency too. You know, agencies get a bad rap, and I have to say, working with one through buying a house wasn't the best experience. Get a lawyer who doesn't work for the agency. But I will say, if you're a foreigner abroad and you want to have something legitimate and you want to have the proper contract, don't be afraid to ask those questions. And more importantly, you know, demand that you have those same, you know, it's way better to have the Italian living contract than the transitorio or temporary contract, which really allows you less rights. So, you know, look up any agency, ask people like me. A lot of people put up their apartments on Facebook groups as well, like local Facebook groups. So there are options, and especially right now. I mean,
Yeah,
can you imagine people?
There are plenty of empty apartments in Florence, which is, you know, bad too.
I will say too that we bought our apartment. The apartment that we bought was used for Airbnb before. I was very happy to offload that from her.
But you know, Georgette, how many apartments unfortunately have been changed forever, because Florence is literally, there is no more 3-bedroom apartments left, because I think whoever had it, they would change them into a two little Airbnb apartments, because I was looking to buy.
Me too.
And I was, you know, how ugly were those apartments? You could have come in and there's like the longest corridor. There was really no beauty.
No corridor, like small rooms. You'd have more corridor than you would have rooms.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, what did people do in these corridors?
Yes, you know, it was. Anyway, I think let's do one last question. Maybe then we can have people unmute themselves if they want to participate in our conversation. Is that okay, Georgette? Do you?
Yeah.
5 more minutes? Let's go until 8:15. So that's 10 more minutes. That's okay.
Yeah.
So Fausto is asking, aside from patients, what are some other hurdles of moving there, living there, etc.? Is citizenship important?
Yeah, you know, citizenship is, I, for one, do not have citizenship yet, for example.
Me either.
And yeah, I mean, it's really hard. I will say that even my husband is an EU citizen. It took, I think, 3 years for him to get approved for Italian citizenship despite being from France. And the reason why we decided that was important was because it helped us get the mortgage to buy our apartment. So in that case, it really was important because it's hard to, if you don't have an established relationship with an Italian bank, they're not going to give you a mortgage. You know, that's a trust relationship. How do we know that you're going to pay this off for 30 years?
Yeah.
So that was, you know, and it was a lot harder than I thought because, you know, we had all the criteria. You know, anybody can go into a situation where you're like, okay, I have all the criteria that you need to go, but still it's the bank that ultimately decides whether or not they're going to give it to you. And pressure tactics and things like that. So I definitely feel like the citizenship helped. If my, you know, I don't know if Nico didn't have the citizenship, if it would have been okay, or, you know, there was some legitimacy to me. And also we're allowed to live abroad and still own a house and be a resident there because he's a citizen. Otherwise it would not be the case.
That's amazing.
So
that's amazing.
Yeah, there were a lot of tax perks and things like that. So in that way, but I will say, you know, you have to think about the legality of moving to Italy. That's number one. It's, you know, maybe in the old days, people would make jokes about how you could just live there and it's fine, but like not anymore. So, you know, they have to really go into like, how can I legally do this? So if you do not have Italian American, but if you don't have an Italian passport, a lot of people do have dual citizenship, and that's obviously a way that you could live in Italy. But, you know, if not, then, okay, the next question is, am I going to get an elective residence visa? Am I going to sign up as a student and take Italian courses and then just live there and then see eventually? Because it takes you 10 years of residency to be able to apply for citizenship. Yeah. So it's tough. I mean, it was really, I would say that was the hardest thing about my first 7 years in Italy, was the legality of living and staying there and working there and paying taxes there. Yeah. So it was extremely intimidating for an Italian, much less a foreigner. Obviously, there's a lot of people who are retired or live off their savings or able to work from abroad. In that case, things are a little bit easier, but still, you need the legal right to live there past 90 days. Yeah. So
that's the trickiest part. That's the trickiest part. You know, it's all the permesso. I mean, let's not even go to that direction at all. Yeah. I think in case of Fausto, because he has such an Italian opera name, Fausto, I'm sure he will find a way to get his honorary Italian citizenship, just because of his first name.
I know, right? I mean, at least that's got to give him an extra point or two.
Yes, I mean, I'm sure they, at least the policemen will like, okay, you know, this Fausto, he deserves more. Exactly. I would say let's just invite everyone to unmute themselves, and if you have any questions, please do, you know, please maybe just state them. I guess we could forget about the chat for the moment. I will unmute everyone. That's probably the best. I think everyone is actually unmuted. So, okay.
I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you very much. This has been wonderful. So thank you, lovely ladies.
Oh, thank you.
It's so lovely to see you. Okay, other people are putting things in the chat.
Oh, you guys are amazing. You know, I have to say, I feel so lucky because anytime I get to talk to Pal, I feel like every time we go to lunch, we have a conversation, we talk about so many real things that I'm just so grateful to have really dynamic friends and connections like you. And, you know, that's something that Florence is amazing for, is you meet so many brilliant people, you know?
Yeah, thank you, Georgette. You're always an inspiration for me because we always have these amazing things to talk about, and ideas are always flowing, and so it's really, really awesome.
It's also the espresso.
Yes,
coffee. I love coffee.
Yeah, yes, I think it totally helps.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess any other questions?
I think somebody on the chat wrote. Oh, somebody asked about, is Dante a prominent figure you see around Florence? Can you describe what the Museo di Dante is like? I have actually never been to the Museo di Dante, I have to admit. And the reason is because I've always been told it's really not that great. So,
you know, I do have to say something that kind of changed. I have a very good Italian friend who's an art historian, and she was working for about 4 years on this project. They actually have revamped the Dante Museum in Florence, and they just opened it. They opened it like maybe a month ago. which was
Yeah.
something really like unusual now in the pandemic time. But it's more,
Really?
yes, it is now.
Can I go in October? I'm going to be back on Friday. So if
Why
you
don't
tell
we
me
make a
in
date?
advance,
Let's make a date
let's
there.
make a date and go to the Dante Museum and see if it's worth it.
Yeah, and let's do it with the woman who worked on all of the,
Yeah, that
all
would be
the, all of the text, the words, in the. I think it would be really cool. So
yeah,
let's do
I
that.
would like to, because I feel like Dante, obviously you see and hear about Dante everywhere. I mean, there's quotes on the Ponte Vecchio. Dante is an omnipresent figure, but then also one that was kicked out. So
Yeah. I think he finally deserves a good museum, and this new look of the museum might actually be something really positive. So
oh
we
wow,
can
that's
report.
exciting.
We can report on that.
We can do that. I can
Yeah.
definitely, I would be definitely super happy to see something positive on that side come out in 2020. So.
All right. Kenzie is happy about this. Kenzie, what is your favorite book set in Florence? Now that you have got us talking about Dante, I want to know, Kenzie, what is that book that you mentioned in the comments earlier? And
Oh, the one about Mark Twain? Was it that one?
I'm not sure. Kenzie said that one of her favorite books is set in Florence. So I'm curious about which one that is.
Oh, so many.
The Florentine series and the Gabriel series by Sylvain Reynard. They take place in Florence. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know that actually.
I didn't know that either, because all I read is 15th century Florence. So
I was going to say, I like a lot of historical fiction when it comes, I mean, obviously I like reading about current Florence, but all the books by Sarah Dunn, for example. I'm a big fan of hers because I feel like I get lost. It's always a backstory thing tied to me about Florence and hearing about what the possible perspectives are of people who live in Florence. And I also went through a phase too where I was reading the gory stuff as well. Like there's this book called The Monster of Florence. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or read about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was about this, serial killer who was unfortunately taking the lives of in-love couples in the countryside. True story. And so anything about Florence, I will absolutely devour, Italian writer or otherwise, because I do like to read other people's perspectives. So yeah, I have a couple of lists on the blog too. Just in general, I love to read, especially now that we're coming into winter. So we have to do a long list of recommendations, especially for 2020. 2020 needs it's a good long list.
Thank you, Kenzie. It's Sylvain is a Canadian author, and he has very beautiful writing. Wow, that's good.
Oh,
Thank you,
wonderful. Okay, I'll write that down actually, because I'm always looking for some new reads. So
yes, wonderful. Thank you, Kenzie, for sharing this.
yeah.
So I guess let's wrap it up. I think people can probably continue with their day. It's already dark here in Italy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Georgette, for your time. It was such a pleasure to talk to you and learn some new things about you that I didn't know.
Well, thank you. Likewise, it was so fun to talk with you. So it was a great Sunday way to wind down the weekend.
Yes. And thank you, everyone, for coming in. It's been a pleasure. Yes, everyone. I'm so glad to see everyone. And I will see many of you in my master classes this coming week on Tuesday and Thursday. And if not, see you next time at the end of October. I'm planning a special guest coming in. So I will write more about that in my newsletter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao,
Thank you.
Have a beautiful Sunday, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Grazie, Georgette. Say hi to Nico for me.
I will. He's actually on the couch over here.
Oh my God.
He's lurking. He's lurking in the background, probably judging what I'm saying,
I love that my cat was pretty much mesmerized by you the whole time. And I love that your husband is just patiently waiting. Literally behind every successful woman, there is a wonderful man. I think that's the story of you two.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that.
Arrivederci.
Ciao, everybody. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.